This is a show for the leaders of tomorrow. You're listening to stories of innovators creating groundbreaking technology and change makers that are shaping the way we live our lives. I'm your host Hussain, and you're joining me while we're peeking into the future. Welcome to the Spark Podcast. Hi, welcome to another episode of the Spark Podcast. Our guest today is the co-founder of ThinkPhi. She started the company with a goal to redefine outdoor spaces and designed the first Ulta Chaata, which is an outdoor shading device that can generate electricity and harvest rainwater. With her love for design, she's finally making sustainable architecture a piece of art. Please welcome Mrs. Priya Vakil.
Thank you for having me.
Ms. Priya, you founded a company called ThinkPhi with an objective of generating clean electricity and rainwater harvesting in open spaces. What is ThinkPhi's vision and what are you trying to accomplish?
So ThinkPhi brings together a few aspects of design, technology, and sustainability. So while there are many products that exist today that are built and focused around sustainability, what we are striving to do is actually fill the gap that exists in terms of experience as well. So when I bring together sustainability, design, and technology, we get products that have great influence on the way that people use it or perceive sustainability or experience it at large. So typically products for sustainability have been always built around performance. So less experience, but more performance. So if I take an example of a solar panel, it's always about how efficient it can be, how much it can generate, what is the most efficient technology out there, etc. And less about the experience. I mean, how often do you take someone up to your rooftop and, show them your solar panel array versus sustainable technologies that are also focused around good design. If you take Tesla, they completely changed the way people think about electric cars. When they took a sort of sports car approach to the same thing, it created a radical shift in terms of what an electric car can mean. And it goes much beyond a golf cart or something like that. So the idea is to bring sustainability to the forefront and use good design and experience as a means to really begin to get people to experience it, get excited about it, and stuff like that. Larger vision is basically this is our first product, but the hope is that with all our future products, we will address these three aspects of product and the outdoors as a means to really get to know more about the environment that we live in.
And Mrs. Priya, the innovation in India is almost at its highest. And, newer products are being developed by local entrepreneurs to solve many problems. Now, as much as this is promising, like you said, they aren't focused on the experience. They're focused on performance and they're widely failing. What approach did you take to capitalize on your innovation?
I think I'd have to say that when a product has more than one use, it automatically becomes something that gets more easily adapted. So let's take the example of our product. It's a shading device. It's a shading structure. So when the sun's out, it provides shade. It's also a rainwater harvesting canopy. So when it is raining, it harvests the rainwater and filters it. And when the sun is out, it generates clean power with its integrated solar components that can then be used to do anything from charge your cell phone to charge your laptop for outdoor workstations, for example. And we also have a version that does EV charge. What it's done is basically taken something that would have had a single function and made it multifunctional. And for us, sustainability is also deeply rooted in this concept. So for something to be completely usable 24/7 across the year, that's what makes its usability sort of special and more sustainable as well in terms of utilization.
Right. So when you talk about multi-usage, there are a lot of products in the market and interesting innovations. There are various things that innovators coming up with But due to lack of consumer awareness, almost every green tech product is seen as a cosmetic upgrade or an alternative to the existing solutions. It's not seen as a necessity or a need of the hour. How would you define the nature of your product to a consumer, or where would you position yourself in the market space?
So for the longest time, we have believed in this 3E approach. So that's engineering, educating, or enforcing. So it's basically one of these three things or all of them that gets that takes a sustainability initiative or technology from a nice to have to a must have. So when we look at sustainability through engineering through better technology, etc., I mean, we could all be innovating the next most energy efficient technology or product, but it still leaves some room for someone to decide whether they really need it and whether they need it right now, or maybe you're too early for what is the need of the hour. The second thing is educating. So the other thing is people need to know that they need something, or they need to know that you exist as a technology or as a product. So that also has its own cycle and takes a period of time. And we found that there's nothing better than, showcases and live test beds, etc. So, for example, Singapore is such a progressive environment to be in because they, readily are accepting of new technologies. They provide test sites, test beds, do lots of pilots, etc. So that's one way of, slowly sliding something that would have been nice to have to a must have. And the last thing is, of course, if none of those two work, or while those work in parallel, is the third E, which is enforcing policy or enforcement at large, which means if I have, a regulatory authority that requires me to install solar rooftop to power outdoor lighting, or requires me to do rainwater harvesting across the board in all residential or commercial buildings, etc., then it's something that I just have to do. So we believe that somewhere within these three E's is the power to really take sustainability initiatives from a nice to have to a must have. And I think without doubt, we're on the extreme end of the spectrum where we think that obviously, sustainable initiatives are something that we should all be embracing, quite openly at this point in time.
And Mrs. Priya, when you speak about Singapore, and you said Singapore in general is a very accepting market, they provide a lot of area or room to grow a green tech company. What inspiration can we take from Singapore's practices towards a sustainable development future?
So I think the biggest takeaway is just the overall attitude towards sustainability and the environment. So, when you want to test a product or a technology, there are multiple stakeholders involved. It could be anything from a government representative to the actual end user or an intermediate customer, someone who's just giving you a piece of real estate for you to test your product or giving you a pilot site. So there are all these stakeholders involved. And I think in more progressive and typically people always think that, money is everything, right? It's about, we couldn't adequately get someone to fund a pilot and therefore nothing went up. That's usually a problem that everyone faces. But I think in these progressive environments, what happens is the attitude towards sustainability is already very different. They're more willing to try things out, and be already more sensitized towards why it's important to do this. Whereas in other parts of the world, you may end up constantly making that case for ROI, or proving that the environment is at stake at large, etc. So I think it basically just comes down to attitude. I feel like India is so powerful because there are so many test beds available for us to test so many various technologies and innovation, and there are so many people here who could be part of some of these things. We have the brain power and talent. There's no doubt about that. It's just, unfortunately, it's sometimes, we also have the money for the most part, but it's just exhausting getting people convinced to be the first to try something that's related to, an environmental practice or technology.
Right. You spoke about the various stakeholders, including a consumer, the end consumer, the way a consumer is motivated towards buying the final product that you have to offer. How do you think consumers in Singapore are motivated differently than in India?
I think people look at the environment very differently, have different kind of respect for the environment. I wouldn't want to isolate Singapore or India for that matter. I think India also has people who care very deeply about sort of, what's going on, the air they breathe and the environment they live in, and, things like that. But I think they do tend to have a completely different respect for it, and because of which, they are already willing to sort of quickly adopt new technologies without necessarily focusing too much on the ROI. So if I were to, change my lights at home from an existing halogen or incandescent to LED option, it's more because we know it's something that works and is saving energy at large, and less about, for every penny spent, what am I getting in return?
Mm-hmm. So that's the mindset that the Indian consumer has, and it's the mindset that even Indian businesses work with. Green architecture is still growing in India, but it's been restricted to prominent builders who can afford the marketing resources and sell their properties as the future of living spaces with a higher price tag, of course. So if we look at the large scale adoption without any government incentives, what should encourage small and medium builders to incorporate sustainable architecture and such practices, since there's no actual demand unless consumers truly understand or appreciate the benefits of green living?
Right. Sustainability has in a sense has sometimes been mistaken for just needing to be high tech, and that to some extent is a myth. So sustainable green buildings at large, can actually adopt many low tech ways of reducing energy consumption and water consumption. For example, the way a building is designed at concept stage to reduce the cooling requirement based on how it's oriented to the sun, or is it a glass facade versus something that gives you more insulation, how you can perhaps use natural air movement and air ventilation versus forced mechanical ventilation, etc. I'm just calling out a few energy efficiency measures here.
Mm-hmm.
But that's basic stuff. That's stuff that actually reduces your capex, and not only your opex, but also avoids over design at the time that a building is being designed and constructed. So, if by providing a well-lit atrium, if I'm able to reduce lighting costs significantly, it's a drop in my capital expenditure. So regardless of whether your marketing is what gets you a premium on a green building and therefore some level of motivation, there is also hidden savings in designing these buildings correctly, using these sort of passive design techniques that make it more energy efficient and resource efficient even for the developers. So whether you're a developer with deep pockets or someone doing smaller scale projects, it's still a win-win situation.
But Mrs. Priya, your product is widely recognized as an outdoor space solution for smart cities. Right? And we're seeing a lot of development in India as the government sets new targets for smart city projects. But do you feel Indian consumers are ready to truly adapt to smart technology at a large scale today?
I think we have the mass to really create impact. There's just so many of us here that any technology that comes into the urban city agenda and cities at large, we can do so much with these sorts of technology. only thing here is we don't showcase enough of it. And then we tend to leapfrog into a technology. So what I mean is when we discuss smart cities, there are so many aspects that go into smart cities, and that's smart living. And, it doesn't end at just having hotspots or everything being Wi-Fi enabled or, stuff that seems very distant from people who actually live in those cities. So I feel like if we had more technologies and made sustainability more of an experience in terms of how people begin to think of their cities, whether it's an app that gives you environmental data or tells you more about the air quality, things like that. I think that's what actually gives us the information, because somewhere all of us as citizens would like that information. It's just we maybe never had access to it. And when you suddenly leapfrog into some of these technologies, again, it's one of those questions of you need to know it exists for you to really want it or use it. And for me, that is the biggest barrier. And that's something that we as smart citizens need to demand of these smart cities. So it's not just about infrastructure and better plumbing lines or better roads, etc.
When we're looking at cities, almost 80 to 90% of them lack master plans or city development planning from the days that they were earlier developed, right? So does that become a bigger challenge when you're retrofitting these cities to convert them into smarter cities or to give them the tag of smart cities? Does that become an initial challenge, and is it something that is the hardest to overcome in the next coming few years?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's it creates a big challenge, because essentially what happens is there are all these skeletons in the closet that come out one after the other, whether you're, because you don't have a clear sense of infrastructure, etc. Also, some cities have grown to sizes where it becomes absolutely important to have this sort of data before a planning exercise is taken on, because you cannot just leapfrog to a brand new plan. There is some level of integration with existing infrastructure and requirements that is necessary. So yeah, you're right. That is one of the biggest challenges, and getting organized data is almost, is 50% of your work done when we look at this kind of stuff, because then you have metrics and data on the basis of which you can develop a new plan.
And Mrs. Priya, we've reached the last segment of the interview. The government is doing various things to propel green living and sustainable development adoption in India, especially with initiatives like the Griha initiative that can compete against LEED. So which policy of the government has benefited your business in any way?
So over the last few years, the government has aligned a lot with the larger sort of sustainability agenda of the world, right? So whether it's kicking off a smart cities initiative, we also have a smart city council now that, in a sense, promotes innovations like ours, and shows us the scale at which we can sort of take these innovations. So, that sort of stuff obviously exists. There is also, like you correctly mentioned, the at a building level. So that's at a city level. That's a much more macro level. And then at micro and meso level is initiatives like these green building initiatives that require, that sort of enforce also to some extent guidelines that require buildings to be more efficient and also adopt newer technologies. We have also made great progress in that regard. I've worked closely with Griha and IGBC, of course, for a long period of time, and we are just next after the US in terms of our green building footprint, which is a huge accomplishment. So that is something that, of course, is having a huge impact on the building industry at large and aligning everyone to common environmental goals. And I think we do also need to see maybe some more stuff at truly the micro level in terms of us as citizens, in terms of what benefits we can really get from adopting environmental measures. So, there are certain rebates etc., for adopting solar power and installation, etc. But very few are something that really are changing the game. They're not really game changers, changing the mindset completely into adoption of some of these renewable technologies.
Right. So what advice would you have for the policymakers of our country to develop that game changer?
I think it would be about something that integrates all these scales across a common platform, because at the end of the day, we can't forget, we can have regulations for green buildings that are, focused around creating green buildings, but we can't forget about the people who are actually going to be using them and what they have to gain from being in these sustainable spaces and environments. So, if there is a direct benefit that can be accrued to the end user, I think that would really be a game changer versus a benefit that a certain developer may get.
Mm-hmm. What is one myth about sustainable development that you can debunk for us today?
I briefly covered it, but I'm going to have to say sustainability equals high tech. And that for us has been, one of the biggest myths. And to some extent, I hope that through innovations like ours, we've been able to be a myth buster in ourselves. So, all we did was take a simple innovation, and of course integrate technology, etc. But, a simple idea can go a long way. And the same thing applies within environmental technology as well. So, you don't need to snap your fingers for lights to come on and, things to go off, etc. But I think the fact that sustainability is actually rooted in very simple innovations that have a huge impact.
All right, Mrs. Priya, with that, let's wrap up the interview with one advice that you would have for entrepreneurs that are trying to enter this space and be the leaders of tomorrow.
We tend to only think about performance and ROI, but I think it is a lot about going back and really listening to what the customer wants, and what it is that they're looking for. And of course, designing or innovating for 2 years down the line, because we tend to think very much in the present and the opportunities that just lie in the present. But I think we need to transport ourselves 2-3 years into the future and really understand what the requirement will be at that point in time.
You heard that from Mrs. Priya Choksi, the founder of ThinkPhi, committed to redefining outdoor spaces using sustainable technology. She designed the Ulta Chaata to harvest rainwater and generate clean energy while providing a magnificent view to outdoor spaces with her knack for sleek designs. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your time, and we're very grateful to host you on the Spark podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Spark podcast. Sign up today to realjob.com and browse all our jobs, contracts, training courses, and much more. I'll see you in the next episode of The Spark. Till then, goodbye.